Welcome to Industry Insights. My name is Sean Marshall, founder and director of Prosumer Connect. We're fortunate enough again to call upon Steven Lurie. Thank you very much, Steven, for joining us.
Only a pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Great stuff. Today's topic, which we have unpacked with multiple suppliers already and industry bodies, is the impact of COVID-19. And I don't think there's any industry within the space of the short-term insurance space that hasn't been impacted, and certainly glass is a big part of any claims environment. So for that reason, we asked Steven to come share with us the impact that COVID-19 has had on your business as such, and unpack that a little bit more. So let's just start with the question of COVID-19. What was the impact that you guys received?
Well, I think like anybody, during lockdown, it was terrible and effectively zero turnover for 5 to 6 weeks. We did keep teams on standby to be able to service essential services vehicles and transport vehicles, because clearly they still needed replacements. And that was quite important, but we had closed all of the branches. Okay. There was some added complexity. I think 1 or 2 days after lockdown started, we had a hailstorm in the north somewhere.
I recall that.
And there were a number of police vehicles that needed replacements and things like that. So it was fun and games, trying to operate where it was difficult to get stuff delivered and warehouses are closed. But from that perspective, I suppose that was the fun part of trying to resolve it. But from a business perspective, I mean, clearly it had a massive impact in terms of, close to zero turnover for that period.
Absolutely.
And then coming out of that environment, when the automotive repair sector was allowed to resume business, it was very slow. People were very scared to be out and about. Sure. Work from home and entrenched, and so we saw a small backlog of claims that had obviously built up over the period that came through, and we saw a small backlog of cash purchases or fleets that could make up some time. But then after that, it leveled out to much lower levels. And so we spent a long time waiting for business to come back at us.
Yeah, I can remember in one of the previous discussions we've had, you said the split is about 50% insured, 50% uninsured. And I'm assuming a lot of your business comes from, big fleets and those kind of things who would have been impacted significantly by COVID-19. And, top of mind, I don't think is your glass. At that junction, as soon as you start running the business again, becoming liquid is the key thing. So I can imagine that part of the industry certainly touched you guys significantly during the early days.
It did, and I suppose we had to share the pain with a lot of that industry. The one of the biggest impacted sectors was obviously car rental.
Yes.
And not only was car rental impacted by the fact that, and even today, travel is nowhere near what it used to be. Clearly, less car rental, less vehicles in that environment for any of the glass incident managers that work with car rental, and the fact that the car rental fleets still today are a shadow of the size that they used to be.
I have to ask you one question, and audience, please excuse me for asking this, maybe a frivolous question. We saw in some of the claims environment, people spending too much time at home. You start unpacking problems in the home, and all of a sudden we started getting some weird claims, of people realizing, but that's not right and that's not right, So it's literally just spending too much time confined. You didn't see that from a glass perspective where people, now wash their cars because it was getting out of their house and then realizing, hey, this is going on.
So in fact, we probably saw the opposite. There were two sides, and I know we're focusing mostly on the motorist here today.
Sure.
But on the building glass side, actually we picked up a few repairs, a few more than we normally would have, because I think those same people looking around decided to fix the cottage pane that had been broken for 5 years before that, or replace a broken skylight or a cracked skylight or something. So I'm sure that's the type of thing that you saw in the claims environment. But we picked up some of that business. It wasn't enough to make up for anything that we lost. But what we did notice is that actually it impacted our repairs quite significantly, because people tended to not want to deal with those types of things. So, and I think the perception is that if I'm driving less, it's less likely to turn into a crack, and so I don't really need to do the repair.
Address it now,
So we did notice that people were more, it's probably the wrong word, and it might be offensive to some, but they were more lackadaisic in addressing those things.
Yeah, fair
and we did embark on a campaign to try and re-educate and remind people how important it is to do a repair.
And do it as soon as possible, Fair enough. So, Steven, a question just, as volumes fully return to where it was pre-COVID, or are you still not there?
No, we're not there, or the industry isn't there, for sure. Most of the insurers that we chat to regularly do observe that there's been lower claims. Clearly, people are still driving less. We do monitor what's happening in terms of traffic and that type of thing. And although it feels, I think, to most people, particularly in Gauteng, like it's returned to normal, which I think is largely driven by schools going back, is that if you observe the work from home environment, that's still quite predominant.
Yes.
It's not as much as it was, but obviously a lot of people are still working from home. So the school run is still there, but people are returning home. And so there's a lot of ancillaries that come with that. If the car's less likely to be in a parking lot, it's less likely to be broken into.
Yes.
If the car's less likely to be parked even in the parking lot near work, there's less likely of an incident. And if it's not traveling as far, there's less likely to be an incident. So I think even though our perception is that a lot of it's gone back to usual, we are seeing that it's not quite business as usual. But I don't think we could be here crying. I mean, business has returned, and it has returned quite well, but definitely not pre-lockdown levels yet.
Okay. So for the most part, you mentioned the branches were closed, you had emergency staff and those kind of things. The size of PG Glass as an operation is significant. How did a business of your size and magnitude, front the storm and get past this? What did you guys incorporate to make sure that you at least keep afloat with most of your staff members sitting at home, not being able to obviously produce and contribute to the business?
So there were a couple of aspects to that. Obviously, we had to place the safety of staff and our customers first.
Absolutely.
So just before lockdown, we did implement deep cleaning regimes for all of the branches. We also introduced a touchpoint sanitizing program, and during lockdown we implemented a program in conjunction with a company that had developed a system for full vehicle sanitization, a company called Road to Race. So we put all of that into place so that when we came back to work, we could do all of those types of things from day one. Our contact center had to go to a work from home environment, and they had to be managed remotely. And even as we started coming back to work, we couldn't bring everybody back into the same site, and so they were spread over different group sites, and so they were still effectively remotely managed. But we had to have the contact center in place, because you've got to be able to receive the calls and process the claims so that you can at least do some business and bring business back into the environment. We did have branches trading on lower hours. We obviously implemented short time where necessary, and I must say, our people came through this very strongly. The team supported us, and we did as much as we could to support the team. But for sure, it wasn't that everything came through unscathed. All of us obviously played our part in taking some form of pain through the process.
Absolutely. So just on that point, I need to just check with you, because you've mentioned a couple of things. So it's certainly what I'm hearing is additional costs, even with not having a fully run operation, the sanitizing that's not for free. And then what I'm more specifically interested in is the sanitization of vehicles. Can you unpack that a bit more for me, and what kind of costs are you looking at? Because you've never had to incur those costs.
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, on one side, you've got PPE, which everybody's had to incur, things like masks, additional sanitizer in all your locations. That's one cost that comes in, and I suppose in a way it's part of life now. It's almost a fixed cost. It's one you won't get away from. The other side of it was obviously to sanitize each car, and I must say, largely we were supported. So some insurers put their hand up right up front and said, look guys, we know that you're going to be incurring this cost and we'll support you. In some cases that's already fallen away, but we did get support from the insurance industry on some of those costs, but it's not there forever, and it is something that we've had to assume. The touch point sanitization, which is probably what most people are used to, where you sanitize the areas of the vehicle that are mostly touched, or the areas that we work on, and we re-sanitize at the end. That's something that adds, it adds labor time, and it adds your material usage and everything before you start the process. The full vehicle sanitization was something that some customers used, particularly in the fleet environment, was quite important to them. And that's obviously at a slightly higher cost, but in many cases, the companies or the customers that were taking that understood the full value of having a full vehicle sanitization, full interior sanitization. I think what's important to note as well is that alcohol is not the best sanitizer for a vehicle interior. So we had to use different materials because alcohol
stains, doesn't it?
Well, firstly, on a leather interior, over time it'll cause cracking of the steering wheel, and it can cause cracking of the seats and things like that because it dries that stuff out. So
I did not know that.
And on things like touch screens and all of that, excessive use of it would lead to that shadowing you get, or that white formation, and you get like a halo effect that starts to form. So we also had to be very careful with what we chose to do the sanitizing, and we chose chemicals that were approved by the WHO. But all of that, was stuff we had to learn very quickly and implement. But as you say, it comes at a cost. And we didn't increase our prices to the market through this period. In fact, we implemented our standard annual price increase during the course of 2020, as we would normally have had to recover inflationary cost pushes then. But so far in 2021, we haven't recovered any of that additional PPE cost or anything.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
So not easy, and I say yet because I suppose at some point we will need to recover at least some of those costs. But it's very difficult because in these discussions, even if I had to chat to you, inflation's running at 3.1%, but you've had a lot of other base cost increase. So if I come to you for anything more than 3.1%, you look at me with glaring eyes saying, well, I've also incurred those costs.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the bottom line is everybody's burning, so it's not a case of, anybody's looking for any increases right now, because everybody's just wanting to stabilize. But thanks for that. I must say, I didn't realize the amount of thinking that needs to be applied from a sanitization point of view, the alcohol and the impact to that. So it's a science on its own. Let's talk about human behavior. So I can only imagine, I've heard some stories in the industry with some clients being laissez-faire with, coming in, doing stuff. And then I hear there's still people to this day, although we've gone down a bit, we're in the safer zone and those kind of things. But I still hear today that some clients are very particular about what you do, how you do it, and some of the other suppliers that I've been speaking to, some clients just didn't want them to come to them. It's as simple as that. Is that the same experience that you guys have received, or?
So I think it's important that we haven't changed our processes. So we haven't become laissez-faire, we haven't relaxed what we do.
Sure.
Our safety protocols around how our technicians, or within the fitment center, all of our staff will behave. If it's mobile and technicians going out to do a job, that entire protocol that we follow around ensuring the safest, most sanitized or sanitary way of doing it is still in place. But yes, there are a number of particularly in the beginning, there were clients that were just not interested in you coming to their house and doing it by mobile. They were obviously too cautious about going out, and there's still a little bit of that around. I think your best thing to do is communication, and that's something we learned quite well through this whole thing, is how important communication was, and let me say less about communication but more about talking to people, because communication is quite broad. So more about just talking to the client, also talking to our staff internally, talking to consumers, be it directly or through social media, and talking to our customers like the insurance companies and the fleet customers about what we're doing and how we are doing it. And those clients that just didn't want any type of service, the important thing is to keep them on the radar and to remind them that when they're more comfortable, we're still around to do that repair or replace. Hopefully the repair hasn't turned into a replacement.
So Steven, you referred to when the gates started opening and we opened business and volumes picked up a bit. Just talk to me about parts, because nothing's happened in the factories and those kind of things. So was there a lag in the parts, or could you guys hit the floor running? What happened from a parts aspect?
It's actually quite a complex question to answer. So yes, when we opened, we had stock, and clearly there was stock in place. When I say we, I mean we rely on Shatterproof for 90%, more than 90% of our supply. So they did have stock, but the factories hadn't produced for that period, and so the supply chain into the factories was obviously not as great as normal. But you had lost 6 weeks of turnover, so therefore, or volume as well. So therefore, there was stock in the system to get firing on all cylinders, which was good. But I think, as you know, international supply chains were disrupted. No matter who you talk to, there's been issues getting things. And in the manufacturing environment, not everything is locally sourced. Things like the vinyl interlayer, there is no local manufacturing, it has to be imported. And there are certain components that go onto the windscreens, things like camera brackets and all of that aren't always able to be procured or produced locally, and they remain imported. So in the beginning, there was definitely enough stock. But as Shatterproof is not a sole supplier to PG Glass, and they supply to some of our competitors, or all of our competitors, when the international shipping lanes and all of that caused disruption and containers were taking longer to come through, clearly many of our competitors that rely on the import of glass as well turned to Shatterproof for additional supply, or more than usual. So I think we all felt the fact, and everyone took advantage of the local supply chain, and of course I think they sold more than usual. Nice problem to have, I suppose, for them, but it started to eat into stock a lot more than I suppose we initially anticipated. So we did go through swings and roundabouts where we ran into some stock issues. Initially, our stock issues were more related to original equipment glass, to the OE glass, because that relied on being fully imported, and I think, as you know, if you've spoken to any OEMs, their supply chains were also very, very disrupted. So those were the first places we struggled to get some glass, was there. And then obviously as some imported component issues came into role, lead times increased, and we did struggle to get some stock. But I do think the local supply and the ability to have that held us in good stead, because even though we ran into stock issues, from what we can tell, we weren't as badly affected as people that relied, completely on imports or largely on imports. And they also had access to local supply during that period. But it wasn't easy, and it remains uneasy.
I can imagine.
Supply is still a problem from many overseas suppliers. The big one that makes all the news right now, because it affects all of us, is these chips that are required, the microchips that are required. But I can tell you, they're one example of pretty much everything. If you procure anything internationally right now,
you're going to get stuff.
It's not that easy to get. Lead times are longer. And the thing is, I spoke earlier about communication and talking to people, and that's what we've also had to train many of our customer service consultants is just, rather give bad news in a nice way, but just give the bad news. Sorry, normally we could do this for you in a week, but it's going to take 3 weeks now, and that's part of what we've had to deal with through this period.
That's impressive. So I have to ask you one last question. I know we're running out of time with this, and again, I can talk to you for hours about this. But in closing on the COVID-19, is there what's the negatives and the positives that you can highlight for us to say, something good came out of it? Did something good come out, or has it just been a negative train all the way?
So I think we've dwelled a lot on the negatives, and I think the negatives are known to everybody. I think for us, it was about how did we stay in touch with people through that period, and we learned a lot about improving our touch points.
Yes.
Internally and externally with customers, and that's probably something, well, not probably, that is something that will stay with us.
Okay.
So I know that across our divisions within a group, we started working closer than we ever have, and we started talking to each other more. We also engaged much more with our customers than we had in the past, and a lot of those more regular touch points we've left in place and will stay in place. And I think it's important internally and externally. We've learned that actually, just because things are hunky-dory and business is running well, you shouldn't stop, staying in touch and keeping those touch points. Yes. I'm not saying that we were complacent. I think in general, industry becomes complacent. When things are running well, you forget to phone a colleague or phone a customer or even phone a friend. And I think during this period, we've all learned that communication is vital. And no doubt, Zoom and Teams have been negative and positive, but for us, there's been more positive than negative.
That's fantastic. Steven, thank you very much for joining us. Guys, I really hope you found it as insightful as I did. Looking forward to more conversations with you, Steven. Thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Cheers.
Ciao.
Cheers, guys.